Good morning to everybody. We'll get our hearing started here. Again, I'm Jerry Rosados. I am the acting director of the OCD. I'm also the acting chair for the Oil Conservation Commission. We are continuing our evidentiary hearing. These are the consolidated cases by Goodnight Midstream and Empire, New Mexico. They are case numbers 24123, 23614 through 17, case number 23775, and case numbers 24018 through 24020, and case number 24025. All the parties are present, correct? I believe everybody is present. Is Pilot on the platform, Mr. Swaza?
Good morning, Mr. Hearing Examiner. This is James Parrott with Beatty and Wozniak. I'll be representing Pilot this morning.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Appreciate it. So we're back on the record. Madam Court Reporter or Mr. Court Reporter, are we on the record?
We're on the record.
Thank you, Madam Court Reporter. Mr. Harwood, I transferred over back to you.
I'll probably kick it straight back to you because I suspect that after yesterday afternoon's discussion, there may well be preliminary matters.
Yeah, okay, we'll do it that way. So last night, we had the motion, the objection that was brought up, and all parties stated what they needed to state. I believe what we'll do as the commission, we'll go into closed hearing. And so we will excuse ourselves, we'll go upstairs, and we will discuss the topic and then come back and bring an answer. Mr. Rubin, please.
Yes, so if I could have a motion to enter into closed session pursuant to section 1015 1H 3 and 1 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss the pending adjudication.
I motion to go into closed session.
I second.
Roll call vote, please.
Approved.
Aye. And approved.
All right, we hope to not take too long with this. So we will let you all stay and we will find a room.
Make yourselves comfortable. Did you all want to bring your teams in? There's people missing, so. Or are you lawyers just fine just being you? Yeah, okay.
I'm not too. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning to everybody. Madam Court Reporter, can we be back on the record, please?
We are on the record.
Excellent. Thank you. We have just finished being in closed session. We're now back in open session.
Mr. Chair, standard, what may be boilerplate, but I need to put on the record that the matters discussed in closed session were only those regarding this adjudication as stated in the motion, and no final actions were taken.
Excellent. I was going to just transfer it over to you and let you say all of that. So I'll let you talk, Mr. Rubin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Based on our deliberations, I understand that the commission would entertain a motion to deny the renewed motion of Goodnight to strike the what it contends is the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Bailey and Dr. Burkhead, with the caveat that Goodnight would be entitled to file a whatever it deems fit as a surreply in writing by March 15th. Do I have a motion to that effect?
I move to with that motion.
I second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I hear 3 ayes. No need to ask for opposition. That motion passes. And then let me turn it over to the commission if they have any other concerns they wish to express to the parties regarding the issues that were somewhat valid as raised by Goodnight.
So thank you, Mr. Rubin. I appreciate it. So the commission also has the concern about the way information is coming over towards the commission and the way the whole thing is just giving us data and how our data is coming about. I know Commissioner Mpoma had a concern. So Commissioner Mpoma, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The concern that I do have is that, we started 3 days now on the 4th day, listening to, let's say, saturation, psychocharacterization, geology. And today we're going to go into the simulation. But I do see that there is still some testimony on geological psychocharacterization, saturations that we've not heard yet, but we're going to listen to the simulation. I mean, that is a little bit confusing to me, the way the whole thing is structured. When I review some of Empire's earlier testimonies that has not been presented yet, it sounds to me that that probably was the case, right? So we did not listen to the actual case, and we listened to rebuttals. And the rebuttals more or less being the case here. So I'm a little bit confused. If, let's say, we're going to go through simulation today, and then next witnesses come back still talking about the input that went into the simulation or probably not into the simulation, it just confuses the commission. But I'm good because I can still follow what is going on, but I feel like the structure is not really well presented to the commission for us to more or less be able to fully understand the whole thing as of now. 4 days into it, and it's still gray. Thank you.
So, and I'll give you a second to be able to respond. We definitely want to hear it from your end as well about the case, but it is a flood of information, and it is a little bit on the disconnected because we've started off, especially with rebuttals right off the bat, and we haven't heard everything the way it should. Now, we've got all the paperwork. I know everybody submitted, and we've got it all the way was submitted to us, but I must concur with the doctor. The information is kind of difficult to comprehend or to follow sometimes. And so we definitely would like to hear from the parties and see your thoughts on the matter. Conversation is always good, but we do have that concern and we wanted to pose it to you all. Would Empire like to start?
I think we may want to confer with our client before we respond.
It's fine. Goodnight, are you in the same thought process?
Probably, I might like to hear what they have to say first, but yeah, I think maybe just a break, allow them to get their thoughts together and respond, but I think I would like to do the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
OCD?
I didn't quite catch all of what Empire had said, but
Empire stated that they would like to have some time to confer with their client.
OCD has no objection to that, but the comments that I want to put on the record, I've tried my share of cases. I've been around a lot of hearings in my career. One of the unfortunate realities for parties is that witness sequencing is not always optimal.
Right.
And it's not an issue of, and I'm defending the bar here generally. There can be reasons for stuff to come out of sequence. I confess a personal desire to try to make everything sequential because it's a story. It makes more sense. So I think that this happens more often than the decision makers like, but it's also a nature of litigation, schedules, various other things. So I do hear your concern, Dr. Mpoma. I've heard it many times, and I can assure you, and I'm comfortable speaking for the attorneys here, everyone has worked extraordinarily hard on trying to make this as organized as possible so it's coherent for your consideration. So that's my little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, echoing the sentiments of Mr. Moander, we don't want to give the impression that we thought there was any gamesmanship involved by any of the parties that we considered for this decision. It is a complicated, and it's not straightforward how the rebuttal works when it's pre-filed. I totally agree.
Agreed. Thank you. Mr. Rice. I'm sorry, Rice, Mr. Beck.
Mr. Rice.
You just became your own entity, Mr. Beck. My apologies.
It's all right. I'm used to 4-letter names, Matt and Beck, so Rice is appropriate. I have no input and no objection to Empire speaking with its client.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott with Pilot.
Thank you. No objection.
Okay. Miss Shaheen, Miss Hardy, would a 10-minute be good for you? You're ready to go. Even better. It's a good thing I asked everybody, please.
Thank you. It might be helpful to have a little context. The parties had conferred about this at one point. Mr. Rankin suggested that Empire go first with all of our witnesses, and we agreed to do that. So that's why we've been approaching it this way. I completely understand the confusion that can arise from that. We've immersed ourselves in this for well over a year now, so I understand how that could be confusing. So our question is back to you. How would you like to have us present the evidence?
Commissioner Mpoma, I'll let you state your thoughts.
Well, I think where we are now, it doesn't really matter, because we've already listened to, let's say, all the psychoauthorization. But I will probably suggest, if it's possible, for us to get through all the psychoauthorization before we get into the simulation. At least we'll get the psychoauthorization out of the way and then focus on the simulation. But if it's not possible, I'm still fine with it. I'm okay.
I believe it was just the concern that the commissioner had, and we as the commission also had, and so we were just bringing it up. If we proceed the way we're going, I think we understand the limitations. We get that. We're just sharing our concern as well. So we can proceed the way we are. I don't think we necessarily have to change everything, but as the doctor mentioned, I think the order may have facilitated it for us a little bit better, but if this is the way we have to go, we have to go. But we did want to put our concern as well on the record. So if you all are okay with that, is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rankin, you heard what Empire had to say. Do you still need time to confer with your client?
No, I don't think so. Mr. Chair Rosados, I don't believe so. I think that, as Mr. Moore stated, presentation of cases is a story, and each party should, I guess, to some extent, be able to present their case in the order they want, and I understand that. So I do intend or believe that we'll be following the the witness sequence in our pre-hearing statement. So I think that may help a little bit, just understanding Goodnight's story, but no other comments from my perspective. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Mr. Moender?
I'm sorry, I had some messages come in requiring my attention. I apologize for that disrespect to the commission. What did I miss out on there?
Ms. Shaheen, Ms. Shaheen stated that they're good to go the way they are. Commissioner Mpoma stated, well, that's fine. We're all good on our end. Are you good as well from what you've heard?
Absolutely. OCD is ready to proceed.
Okay. Mr. Beck?
Rice is ready.
Excellent. Mr. Parrott?
We are prepared and ready. Thank you.
Beautiful. Let's turn that over to our hearing officer, Mr. Harwood.
All right, with all that said, then, Ms. Hardy or Ms. Shaheen, does Empire have a next witness?
Yes, we do, Mr. Examiner. Our next witness is Dr. Jim Buckwalter.
All right.
Good morning.
Morning, Dr. Buckwalter. If you'll please raise your right hand. You swear and affirm the testimony you give here today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Buckwalter.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
My name is James Lee Buckwalter.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Gemini, and I'm the Jim in Gemini. Gemini also means twins, so I had a partner when I started the company.
Have you previously testified before the commission?
No, I have not.
What is your area of expertise?
I would say reservoir simulation, compositional simulation as well.
Have you provided a summary of your education, training, and experience as attachment 1 to your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Based on those qualifications, I request that Dr. Buckwalter be qualified as an expert in reservoir engineering and simulation.
Mr. Rankin, any objection?
No objection.
OCD.
No objection.
Rice.
No objection.
Pilot. Pilot. Mr. Parrott. Parrott for pilot.
I apologize. I thought I was off mute. No objection. Thank you.
You'll be so recognized.
Thank you. Dr. Buckwalter, have you provided direct and rebuttal testimony and exhibits in these cases?
Yes, I have.
Do you affirm today under oath that your testimony is true and correct?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, Commissioners, I request that Dr. Buckwalter's direct and rebuttal testimony and exhibits, which are marked as E, E1 through E21, M, and M1 through M20, be admitted into the record.
Any objection from Goodnight?
No objection.
None
OCD.
from OCD.
No objection.
And a pilot.
No objection.
They'll be so admitted.
Thank you. Dr. Buckwalter, let's go through some of the highlights of your testimony, and I'll go through these slides that I have up on the screen.
Okay.
Ms. Hardy, just sorry to interrupt. Did you tender the doctor as an expert?
I did.
Okay, sorry,
Yes,
I missed
no.
it. My apologies.
No problem. Thank you. Dr. Buckwalter, looking at this slide, can you provide an overview of what you did in this case?
Okay. Before I get into the details of the case, I'd just like to outline what we do. I know we have a mixed audience here, and some people are very proficient in reservoir simulation. Others probably don't even know why I'm here. I have a PhD from Rice University, and I created what's called a compositional model. And there's basically 3 pieces of information that are in the model. The first is PV equal nRT, which basically says that we have a box and we take so much of a fluid out of the box and measure the pressure change, we can figure out what was originally in the box. So we use that relationship to take production and pressure measurements in a reservoir. And once we understand that relationship of the production, is that me or?
No, it's on the platform someone's turned on.
Okay. So,
Yep, just 1 second, doctor. Let's make sure we find who it is. Yeah, if we could just make sure, even here in the audience, just turn off your microphones and speakers on your laptops so we don't get the feedback. Also on the platform, please make sure that you keep yourselves muted. My apologies, doctor. Please proceed.
that's okay. I'm not used to being called doctor, but I think I'll get used to it. So anyhow, if we've got production in the reservoir and we understand the average pressure at different points, we can actually figure out with very good certainty what the original oil in place is. Okay. Now there's two other relationships that we have in the simulator. The first is simple. In minus out is equal to accumulation. And the third relationship, which I could go into, it's a fractional flow equation called Darcy's law. Now, you may be surprised that I went to a very good university, Rice University, gave me a PhD, and the only thing I did was use those three pieces of information, which I just explained to you. So anyhow, that's what's in the simulator. So how do we put a model together and how does it work, okay? Well, if you think about the testimony you've heard to date, the way I think of it, it's like pieces of a puzzle. The reservoir simulation model is the only place where you put all the different pieces of reservoir engineering and geology together in one place and actually see what the puzzle looks like. And it's really that simple. And so in this case, we put all the data that I was given together in one place, build what we call a model that represents the fluid flow and production and so forth in the reservoir, and then adjust parameters until we can fit the historical production and pressure history in the reservoir. Okay, so basically the way this whole process starts is I don't know anything about the client's reservoir, okay? I'm just a consultant. So I ask the client, they provide maps to me that I integrate in. They provide production and pressure history. And the most important thing they provide to me are uncertainties. Okay. So there's certain things that we put in the model that we know with certainty. For example, the production pressure data, hopefully. There's other things we know with certainty. The fluid data can be measured in the lab. And there's a lot of things that have a lot of uncertainty, to be honest, depending on how good the geology is. And that would primarily the geology is the big thing. So I put all that data in, and then essentially what we do is we build a representation of the reservoir underground. We turn the wells on and the fluids all move around and the physics represent that. And then the first time we run the model, nothing works, typically. And it's always the geologist's fault, of course. And so what I do is I adjust the parameters within ranges I've been given. And if and when I achieve a fit, we can then use that model to run what we call forecasts. So we can say, what if in the future we do this and that and so forth. Now, in this case, I honestly did not think I was going to be here. And the reason was I spent, I don't know, 4 or 6 weeks. I put a model together. And this is a very complex model. I mean, to be honest, to do this model justice and to history match all 638 wells, and we're talking several man years. And I mean, that would be one great consulting project. Unfortunately, I didn't do that. But I put the data in. I spent 4 to 6 weeks on this thing. And you know what? I went to Empire. I showed them a model that fit all the data. And you know what? The one thing it did not fit was the saltwater disposal volumes. I only had about half of them in. And I told Daryl, I said, Daryl, you can take this model, you figure out how to take this model and you know, testify and so forth. I can't testify to this model. So Daryl said, look, Jim, let me come over to Daryl Davis. I'm sorry, I'm using it as a first name. So Daryl came over to my office. And he said, look, give me the model. Let me look at all the data. You know, as I said earlier, to me, it's just a pile of data. I don't know what the quality of data is. It's up to the client who studies this for years that understands all these intricacies that are built into the model. So anyhow, Daryl came over. He spent a week or two. I actually gave him a computer with the model and the match. It was a great match, at least for a first order match. And he looked at it for a couple of weeks, and after a couple of weeks said, Jim, yeah, you put 638 wells in, but you screwed up on 6 of them. And those 6 wells are actually very important wells. They're the water supply wells. And if you're a reservoir engineer, and this is like, for me, it was like winning the jackpot, literally, because I put in the corrected water supply well data, and I turned on all the saltwater disposal wells that we had in the model, and we had essentially almost a perfect fit. So that gave me confidence, at least, that we had a good model. And fortunately or unfortunately, that's why I'm here. So I think I've kind of explained most of the things on science, see if I've missed anything. The one thing I would say, this model has almost 90 years of production and pressure history. So with that much data, it doesn't matter who builds this model. If you build this model correctly, you have to fit that relationship between production and pressures. And whoever builds this model, all these models can be a little different. They're never going to be the same. But what they will have is they will ultimately have the same amount of oil, water, gas originally in the model in 1938. And we'll all have slightly different parameters for relative permeabilities and, things in the model. But at the end of the day, all those models that are good will have a good fit, at least on a first order, of the production and pressures over that, at least on a field-wide basis. The last thing I say, a couple other things I say, when you build a model like that, it's like eating an elephant. You don't need to eat an elephant in one bite. You have to eat it one bite at a time. And so the way I approach a model like this is, if you're trying to win the lottery, you got 10 numbers. This thing's got literally thousands of things that you need to fit to get things to work. So the first step is we try to establish a field match. And we do that by, as I said, running the model and establish the field-wide oil, water, gas volumes and matching the rates and pressures. In this case, we also matched the leak between the San Andreas up into the Grayburg. Once we've got that, we've got the volumes right, because if you don't have the volumes right, you can't do anything else. The second step, and we did this in the model, is we actually try to match production and rates and pressures and so forth in groups. So as big as this model is, it's 17 miles high and 10 miles wide. I thought originally I could just match the MSU. And I thought, this thing's so big, I can just match the wells in the MSU, except maybe some wells on the edge here. We'll have a good match. I could not do it. I literally had to put all 3 leases in here before I could even come close to a history match. And I guess that's because of the 90 years and how big this thing is. It's surprising, but fluids do move between these different leases. So once you've established that, you've got the right volumes, you can start to look at the details. And the next level of detail that I look at is I try to say, well, I got 630 wells here. I can spend the next 2 years trying to figure this out. And I'm going to run out of time and money, and I wouldn't even be here today. So what I do is I create groups of wells. So I'll say maybe the groups of wells up dip in the AGU and the EMSU and so forth, and a group of wells down dip. And I try to match the production for those wells within the group. And I did that. For example, I've got a customized porosity field that fits, basically has different porosity for every cell in the model. And the third thing I did was try to figure out what is the purpose of this simulation study. Well, the purpose of the simulation study is not to figure out, at least for now, where to infill drill wells. It's basically on a field-wide basis to just understand the communication between the San Andreas and the Grayburg, if there was some. And so to do that, you just need to have a good field match. And that's what I did. But to take it one step further, I had identified, as I'll show later, where there were leaks between the San Andreas and the Grayburg. And I essentially customized permeability leak to represent a fracture, so that I think at almost 100 different wells, we've created leaks that are customized to try to fit the water leak at those individual wells with reasonable certainty. Okay.
You ready for the next slide? Or are you
Yeah,
still?
I'm almost ready.
Or you have anything else on this one?
Let's see. No, I don't really have anything else on here.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that, but I just didn't want to be talking up here and y'all not know what I'm doing. So go ahead.
Okay.
So
On this, which is marked as Exhibit M2, please.
Okay, this is the model itself. It's actually a detailed model in terms of cells. In terms of geology, I started this in the middle of last year. So what I was given was a top structure for the Penrose. I think I was given the top structure for 2 different intervals in the Grayburg, and then the top structure for the San Andreas, and the thickness for for these respective layers. We have 638 wells in the model. We have 10 layers, 345,000 cells. The way it's constructed is we have 2 Penrose layers, 5 Grayburg, and 3 San Andreas. We've integrated 24,000 startups going all the way back to 1938 and into 2025. And the view you see on the right here, you can see the gas on the top here that's primarily in the Penrose, which is in communication with the Grayburg. Underneath it, you're going to see the Grayburg itself. And underneath that, the blue is essentially the San Andreas aquifer, which is 1,000+ feet thick. You're only seeing part of the aquifer here. The aquifer that's under the Grayburg. We actually had to extend this aquifer out to the west to get a history match. And so that's the grid that you're looking at. We had to rotate the grid as well, and you're seeing the saltwater disposal wells in that grid. Okay.
What is shown on this slide, which is Exhibit M3?
Okay, so when you got 638 wells and almost 90 years of production, I honestly didn't know what would come out of this model. I didn't know if this would be an answer that Goodnight would like, or we would like, or whatever. So the first thing I do is I kind of do what I call data mining. So I try to look at all the data I've been given. I was given some reports, and this is, excuse me, this is one of the early reports in 1989 that suggests that we have a solution gas drive reservoir here, and that there is some communication between the San Andreas and the Grayburg itself. And you can see it from these documents here. So the other thing I knew was that the pressure dropped in the San Andreas from at least from this report, from 1527 to 1245. So this gave me an idea of what might be going on in terms of the physics. And this is before I built the model.
What's shown on this slide?
Okay, if you're gonna fall asleep later, but pay attention on this slide, okay, because this is really important. Now, the way I figured out what was going on in this reservoir was I said, let's look at 1987, and let's look at the cumulative water ratio of all producing wells prior to water flooding. Once you're water flooding, everything gets mixed up, right? And so what you're seeing on the right side here is I've got highlighted squares over the wells. They're abnormally high water oil ratio, some as high as 13. A lot of these wells are, 1 or less. Okay, and now if you look, let's look, I guess I don't have a pointer, huh? You can point for me?
I can point for you.
Okay, so if we look at the top set of squares I have over there on the right-hand side, what I've displayed on the map on the right shows the average thickness of the reservoir. So in that area, the thickness of the reservoir is somewhere between 60 and 100 feet. And if we look over on the left in that same square volume, we've got, 20 or 30 wells. And they're all low water oil ratio wells. In other words, it's the thinnest part of the reservoir, and we're not seeing any water production, or very small water production. Now, keep in mind, if there is an aquifer, a significant aquifer attached to the Grayburg, you should see that water coming in an Edgewater Drive from left to right. And the wells on the left side of this reservoir, you could say the west side of this reservoir, should be the wells where the water hits first. Now, obviously, there could be some water coming up for the bottom as well, but this is a very big aquifer that's coming into this reservoir, the Grayburg. So it would have to come in not just from the bottom, but from many miles to the west as well. And you're not seeing that. So this shows that there's no evidence of a strong aquifer attached to the Grayburg itself. Okay. Now, if we look at the second set of boxes, here's an area of the reservoir that's really thick. So we've got somewhere between 525 and 70 feet, 570 feet from the top of the reservoir there, all the way down to the history match oil water contact. And you can see on the left-hand side there, we've got 5 wells in that area that produce extremely high water oil ratios. And I don't know, probably 40 or 50 wells that produce very low water oil ratios. So that's inconsistent. If you're in the thinnest part of the reservoir and the deepest part of the reservoir, you see more water. And similarly, if you're high on structure, you should see that, water coming up into all the wells in that area, not just some of those wells. And I would challenge anyone if you're not sleeping tonight, I'd suggest that if you can get the production records, put the cumulative water oil ratio map put the cumulative water oil ratio for all the individual wells, put that in Excel, okay? And then look at the depth of the deepest perforation in all 638 wells and then plot it and see if there's a correlation. Because there should be a correlation that the deeper wells, they're deeper in the reservoir, in the thinner part of the reservoir, they're closer to the aquifer. If there's bottom water drive, it's going to come up much faster in those wells that are deeper in the reservoir. And you'll see a clear trend. And I don't think you'll see that. So it's actually these highlighted wells that you see here, these are the wells where I put the leaks in. And this is basically the way I constructed the model, assuming these were the fracture locations. Okay.
And
Okay.
It's shown on Exhibit M4.
Okay. So the first thing I said I wanted is run the model and see, even if it's feasible, that we could even come close to history match. Just putting the Grayburg in with I've actually got a weak goat seep aquifer attached to it as well. And see if I could just fit things. I actually got a model that could fit the oil, the gas, and sort of the pressures, okay? The problem with this model was it was very low versus the historical cumulative water production that you see here on the right. And so as a result, the conclusion was that I had to have another source of energy coming into the Grayburg itself. And so, it had to come from somewhere.
What's shown on this slide?
Okay, keep in mind this is a semi-log plot to just kind of accentuate what's going on. So the squares that are purple here, they show the historical production. We actually only knew the cumulative production. I forgot what date that was, from 1938 to some time. I had to figure out what that was. But that second point there is basically where we started to get individual well rates on the wells and on the field. But what you do see in 1986, what I'm showing here is what the rate we have from the match model that shows the water rate that we're getting from the Grayburg and the Goat Seep by itself. And that's about 3,600 barrels a day. And that's about an 8,400 barrel water per day shortfall versus what we had in terms of historical production. And after that, 1986, that jump up is from the water flood.
What's shown on Exhibit M5?
Okay, so, as I probably said, how do we get the match model? This is even though we're just trying to do a field match and get the water leaks, and with this much production and having a potential leak between the Grayburg and St. Andrews, it's a very difficult model. I mean, I've done 350 models plus in the last 20 years. And this one might be, might be at the top of the list. So it was a really hard history match. There's a lot of moving parts. You have to get the aquifer characterized properly. You have to get this leak characterized properly. You've got these 100 leaks between the two reservoirs. So it's very challenging, but we managed to finally get a good fit, and we fit field-wide historical production and saltwater disposal volumes, and we also fit historical pressures. Okay.
What's shown on Exhibit M6?
Okay, so this is a field-wide match. You can see oil, water, gas match, the water injection, and so forth. And it's actually shown a forecast as well into the future. So you can kind of ignore that for now. And this just shows some of the parameters that we had in the match model. The gas oil ratio in that match model is 375. It's a little bit less than what came out of a 1990 working interest owners report, which was 423. The beats of bow that they had and they've been carrying for the original oil was 1.2. And I'm guessing that 423 and that 1.2 was from very early data, and I don't know how accurate it was. But because I have a slightly lower GOR, I end up with a slightly lower beats of bow. Okay. A little less gas in solution, beats of bow is a little less. These are starting pressures we have for the Grayburg and San Andreas shown here. You can see our match of our 1986 pressures. San Andreas is essentially 1245, Grayburg's somewhere. And there's a variable pressure everywhere in this reservoir. It's not like it's one point, okay? If you take a reservoir at 17 miles from north to south, it's not a box. It's anything but a box. But yeah, the pressures range from like 300 to almost 600 pounds. And I actually tried to create a customized permeability field and kind of move essentially the net to gross around between these different areas so that I could better match the pressures in these three respective leases and the fluid flow between the leases as well. And taking it one step further, we matched the pressures in 2024 for the Grayburg and the San Andreas, as you're seeing here on these two respective wells. And one of the neatest things about this model is actually came out of Larry Lake's testimony. In his testimony, he said that currently the San Andreas aquifer is building up between 4 and 10 psi per million barrels of water injected. And when I had this history match and put all this thing together, I didn't have this information. I went back and looked at my model, and I was building up about 4 psi on average per million barrels of water injected currently. So that gave me some confidence that if anything, the model's a little conservative, because if it's 4 to 10 psi, the 10 is going to correspond to areas in the San Andreas that are tighter, where the pressure is building up faster. And then over here on the right, you can see how complex this thing is. You've got water that's come into the top of the formation here after we've displaced water. In the middle of the formation, we've got some oil and water mix. And this is just looking at it from top view. And down here on the bottom, of course, that's the AGU. And then you see a 2D representation. Okay.
And Dr. Buckwalter, just so it's clear, Dr. Lake is one of Goodnight's experts, correct?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. He's not with us. I like Larry Lake. He told me one time, he said, I was asking, we have a geostatistic package in our software, and I asked him, I said, all we use is Cregan when we develop the maps here, and you got all this fancy geostatistics. Can you explain, how to use all this fancy stuff? You know what he told me? He just smiled and said, Jim, there's a lot less here than meets the eye. We had some licenses there at the time for the students, so go ahead.
And what's shown on this slide, please?
Okay, now this slide is, what isn't it showing? It's showing my relative permeability curves, okay? Now, the first thing I will say is these are not relative permeability curves they're indicative of a dual porosity system, which is what we have here, okay? These are relative permeability curves that were required to come up with a history match of a single porosity system. And I know Dr. Mpoma, you were wondering about this yesterday, so I decided to put some slides here and just kind of explain our workflow and why we did what we did. Okay, so what is this?
Oh, do you want me to?
Yeah, let me see. Here's some adjustments that we made. And this is just in terms of how much production we've had up here on the top. We produced about 150 million barrels primary. That's about 16% recovery factor. The water ratio at that time was 1. When we're currently in water flooding, we're at 185 million barrels of cumulative production. And our cumulative water ratio is 10, and we're at about 20% recovery factor. If we run this forward to 2038, the recovery factor is about another 7 million barrels. And as far as the relative permeability adjustments we made in the model, there's 30% water saturation reported in 1990 report. We're using 35. Residual saturation that we're using slightly different. We're using 21 versus 25. So a little different. These, of course, these parameters were made so we could come up with a good history match. And then the data that was in the 1990 report here is shown on the bottom. Okay, next slide, please.
What's shown on this slide, which is dual porosity modeling experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to brag, but when I was at Texaco, I was supporting at Texaco. We had a simulator that we used to represent fracture simulation in the North Sea. And we're the first company to actually incorporate anywhere in the world the gravity contribution, which I'll talk about. And I've studied some different fracture reservoirs around the world as well. So, and this is primary for the this isn't for the attorneys here. This is for the reservoir engineers. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, we have a single porosity model, and I will concede that those relative permeability curves in a perfect world are not the right relative permeability curves. We have two sets of relative permeability curves, don't we? We have a relative permeability curve for the matrix and a second one for the fractures. And here's the problem with starting with the dual porosity model. You double your number of unknowns. You need to know the matrix block size. And there's a gravity contribution, which I show over here on the right, that you don't have in the single porosity model. And so, for example, if we've got oil in the fractures, if we've got water in the fractures and oil in the matrix, a 5-foot block and a 0.1 psi per foot difference, what we have essentially is we have a gravity contribution that's acting over the box itself. So if I pretend this is my fracture and I poke a hole in it, what happens? Water comes out, right? Well, that's the same thing that I'm showing here, okay? And the other thing you have is you have a duplicate set of different properties. You have to characterize both the fracture and the matrix porosity, the fracture and the matrix relative permeability curves. There's something we call capillary pressure that needs to be characterized. And then permeability for both the fractures and the matrix, okay? So there's a lot of unknowns if you start with the dual porosity approach. So what we use is a single porosity approach to figure out, basically to simplify this and then switch it to dual porosity if need be.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I have not seen these slides. This is all new information. I don't even know what to say. I did have a chance to depose this gentleman, but I have not seen any of this before. These are not exhibits. It's not testimony. This is supposed to be a summary. We're now into, see how many minutes we're in. 40 minutes was supposed to be a summary of his testimony. This is all new. All new.
Ms. Harding?
I mean, it's, I have a lot of questions for him, but, so I don't know how to proceed here. Other than just to raise it as an objection, because, it's just patently unfair to have a 40-minute, narrative of information that wasn't provided to us. And the intent from the pre-hearing order was to provide us with the direct testimony so that we could then evaluate the input, the assumptions, the inputs, the parameters of all, and the conclusions of all these witnesses. And now we're getting something different and new. The morning of the hearing, at a time when we're supposed to be getting a summary only of the testimony that was provided in writing.
Not seeing the document we're looking at. I'm not seeing it in subsection M of the exhibits. Is it somewhere else?
Mr. Examiner, I'm happy to respond. So some of these slides are background slides that have been provided. They're demonstrative exhibits. They are not new. I mean, the slides are new, but the information is from the exhibits that we've included. They're more detailed, and we've provided them to address Dr. Ampoma's questions, largely that have come up during the hearing, because it seemed that this was information that he wanted. So
well, it's not really a question of whether they're new or not. It's a question of whether or not they've been provided to Mr. Rankin so that he's not being sandbagged with new information that wasn't provided.
well,
Have these been provided to Mr. Rankin or the other parties?
these are demonstrative exhibits to explain Dr. Buckwalter's testimony.
Okay.
Most of them have been provided. The ones that are not marked as exhibits have not, but I will note that Mr. Rankin deposed Dr. Buckwalter for many hours and obtained the basis for his opinions.
I still don't think it's fair to present demonstrative exhibits that have not been shared with the other parties.
I guess if I had a chance, I mean, obviously, as Dr. Buckwalter testified, this is one of the more complex models he's ever put together. Okay. And if I had at least had a chance to review and understand how the information now he's saying he's relying on, I mean, obviously this is information he thinks is really important. Okay. And as a lay attorney who is supported by his experts, I did my best to evaluate, understand what he thought was important during the deposition. But if I had understood, at least, this morning, what maybe he thought was really important, I would at least not be taken totally flat-footed by this. But I don't know, how to proceed, because I would like to be able to review these slides and have at least an understanding of the import of them relative to his updated model now, because he has, my understanding, has substantially updated significant portions of the model with his rebuttal, and that's fine. We pointed out lots of issues and problems with it during the deposition, and he's adjusted it. But I would like to have the opportunity to actually review these slides before I have to undertake a cross-examination.
And Mr. Hearing Officer, I just took a look through the deposition and rebuttal just for like this slide, and I'm not making any accusations here, but I'm not seeing gravity physics show up in that rebuttal. So, which seems to be a term of art as far as I'm hearing today. Perhaps, and I'm a fan of this, an offer of proof of some form that this has been disclosed would quell any dispute here, so we can keep moving.
Well, I mean, my concern is unfairness, and that's, it seems to me that it's demonstrative exhibits or not, if they've not been provided to the other parties. I don't think it's fair to be questioning the witness about demonstrative exhibits that have not been provided to the other parties. So, the only solution I can think of, unless how many of these are there? How many?
Only a couple. There are only a few. Most of our discussion focuses on actual exhibits. These were provided as really sort of background for those based on the questions of the commission of other witnesses.
So, Mr. Rankin, how much, when she says only a few, let's assume it's less than half a dozen. How much time do you think you would need to review them before you'd be prepared for cross-examination?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a few questions I could ask. I think that would, let me put it this way. I would like to have, I don't know, a couple hours to sit down with my experts and just like evaluate what he's saying in these slides, because I'm a layperson. Maybe one of the reservoir engineers could say, okay, I could get through this fast and understand what he's doing, but I need to understand a little bit before I can engage in meaningful cross-examination, exactly how this relates to what he said in his initial testimony and what he's saying now in his rebuttal, written testimony. I just need a little bit of time. Now,
Oh, and that wastes the commission's time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem with surprise stuff. I don't know how much of this was covered in the witness's deposition, how much of the information is actually new versus how much is, just a demonstrative aid to stuff that has already been covered with the witness. But that's a risk that you bear when you present demonstrative exhibits that haven't been shared with opposing counsel. Mr. Rubin.
Yeah, Mr. Howard, I do echo those sentiments, and I do think it is patently unfair to include demonstrative exhibits that have not been disclosed. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. To the extent that what the substance of these demonstrative exhibits were part of what has been disclosed in depositions, that's fine. But I would strongly recommend to the commission that any exhibits that have not been previously disclosed, as even if they're quote unquote demonstrative, should not be presented today.
That's fine. I'm happy to proceed to the slides that are exhibits. I think that these are matters that will be asked about by Dr. Rampoma and probably Mr. Rankin during the questioning of Dr. Buckwalter. So we were trying to head some of that off, but that's fine. We can go ahead with the slides that are exhibits if that's acceptable.
Well, and maybe I could suggest that on a break, you share these demonstrative exhibits with Mr. Rankin. If he chooses then to use them in cross-examination, then the fairness problem is solved.
Sure, that's absolutely fine.
But for now, they're not, don't be showing the witness demonstrative exhibits that haven't been provided to the parties.
Understood.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Can you describe what's shown on this
Yeah.
slide, which is Exhibit M7?
Okay. Okay. Now if you look at the model, essentially we have, in order to get this thing to fit, you have to have essentially a small, it doesn't seem small, it's 1.5 billion barrels, the Penrose, Grayburg, Goat Seep, Aquifer. That's the fit that we established in order to come up with a history match. And the San Andreas, by comparison, is 157 billion barrels. So basically 99% of this aquifer, that contribution is really potentially that we're going to get is coming from the San Andreas. Now, if I make the attach an aquifer, as I'll show you, to the Penrose, Grayburg, Goat Seep, and make it larger, then I lose the history match of all the wells on the western side of the structure. And essentially, this is what we call Edgewater Drive on the right side here. You can see these colored lines are depth lines, and you can see how the water is moving up and following those depth lines. And that's essentially what we call Edgewater Drive. And then on the left here, you can kind of see the initial ternary diagram for this bottom of the Grayburg, and then you can see it in 1986. Okay.
And what's shown on Exhibit M9?
Okay, this shows what you're seeing on this exhibit here. On the far right-hand side, you can see the reservoir that we have itself for the Grayburg Penrose, and it's cut off a little bit of the Goat Seep Grayburg Aquifer, but it's the top view of the reservoir. And this gray area out to the west represents the aquifer that we've added to this model. And what we do is we go into the aquifer, we step the cells out by a factor of 2, so we get the physics properly represented. And then on the edge here in the forecast, one of the forecasts is we added 11 spillover wells to say, well, what if in the future when we run these forecasts, what happens if we put 220,000 barrels of water per day of water disposal well out here on the edge? How would that affect the San Andreas aquifer and then the leak up into the Grayburg and so forth? Okay.
And what's shown on Exhibit M10?
Okay, this basically shows you what's going to happen in the future. And I wish I could show you why, but a fig picture of it, but I won't be able to, but I'll describe it nonetheless. So over here on the left-hand side, we show the saltwater disposal rates, and we can see it jumping up to 350,000 barrels a day. And that's the case where we add the new saltwater disposal wells. So we've got two curves that jump up to that point, and that's the blue curve and then the red curve. The blue curve corresponds to a case where in the future, we take the history match model from 2025 forward, and we turn on these 220,000 barrel a day disposal wells, okay? And then let's see, if we take let's see, the red curve has got the new saltwater disposal wells with no spillover. The blue curve has got the spillover, and then we've got these dash curves. The dash curve that's green has got the existing saltwater disposal wells in the future with no spillover. That shows what the rates will be in the future. And the orange dash curve shows what will happen with the existing wells with the spillover. Now, you would think that if you crank up and add these new saltwater disposal wells, we've drastically increased the water that's going into the San Andreas, okay? So you would think that all these cases would produce different results as far as the water influx in the Grayburg. But over here on the right, we can see how much water is going into the Grayburg. In all these curves, it doesn't matter which case you run, they all go up to about 50 plus thousand barrels a day. And that intuitively doesn't make sense, right? So we have a higher injection rate. In the future, we should see a higher leak and higher disposal rate into the Grayburg. And let me explain, I had a figure, but I can't show it, but let me explain why this happens. What happens, it's really cool. It's one of the coolest things about this whole study is when you inject that water, that aquifer goes out 30-something miles. And what happens is you're injecting water so fast that within the next 3 years, under in San Andreas part that's underneath the Grayburg, it's building up to about 2,700 pounds. And essentially at that point, you can't inject any more water because if you did, you'd frack the rock. I gave it 3,000 pound maximum injection pressure. So from that point forward, if you look at the model in 2028 versus 2035, the pressure in the San Andreas under the Grayburg is essentially the same. And what's happened is the water now is pseudo steady state. It's either moving up at 50,000 barrels a day, or it's actually moving out into the aquifer itself. So essentially what's happening is we're injecting water at such a high rate that we very quickly reach pseudo steady state underneath the Grayburg, and we're at 2,700 pounds. And from that point forward, it's a huge aquifer. I mean, it's got the capacity to take tremendous amount of water, 159 billion barrels. And if we say, hey, we can build this up to 3,000 pounds, that's great. So technically, from an intuitive standpoint, you think you can get all that water in, but you can't because it takes a long time for that water actually to move from where it is in 2028 to move out that 33 miles. Until that water moves, I mean, that water movement is basically what creates that pressure wave, okay? Okay, now the other thing you'll notice that this saltwater in the future, what happens is the leak rate increases to about 50,000 barrels a day into the Grayburg, and very quickly within the next few years. Oh, can I get back to that last slide? There's one other point I wanted. Oh, that's okay. Go to the next slide. Okay.
The next M11.
Yeah. No, I think no. I'm the best. Oh, whoop! You weren't supposed to show that. Sorry.
I'll skip through it.
If anybody saw that, it was a really good slide. Okay. Well, anyhow, let's talk conceptually about what's happened up to today. Well, up to today, we've what's happened is we injected 573 million barrels of water as saltwater disposal. But at the same time, about 77% of that water has been used to create our water flood in the Grayburg. So really only a little more than 20% of the saltwater injection water has net been injected into the San Andreas, okay? So really we haven't seen a lot of water coming in through these leaks up to now, as partly due to this. Now in the future, what's going to happen is that the pressure is going to build up in the San Andreas, and the difference in pressure between the San Andreas and the Grayburgs become greater. At the same time, we're not going to have the benefit of that water supply well. So what's going to happen in the future is we don't have the water supply well production to offset that injection. And at the same time, we're building up this pressure difference between the San Andreas and the Grayburg. And the net result is you're going to have a rapid increase in the water that's moving into our Grayburg Reservoir. Next exhibit, please. And don't show that, please.
Okay.
Don't show that either.
What about exhibit M12, please?
And they were all just to monitor things to really just show what I just said. But nonetheless, you just have to trust me. Okay, now this. Okay, so what we did after the hearing, there was a lot of concern that, hey, maybe there is an aquifer in the Grayburg somehow, and we have a seal between the Grayburg and the San Andreas. So, but the first thing we did is I had a slight mistake in the model. I went to add a couple saltwater disposal wells that you see here. So I made a pressure correction in the model and adjusted the match, and I think you'll see it on the next slide.
And what is shown on exhibit M13?
Okay, this just shows the new match. It's basically the same match I showed you on a previous slide. So we've added the saltwater disposal wells. We've adjusted starting pressure. We come up with a good match as far as the pressure on 2024. And over on the right here, you can see the match on the oil, water, gas, and so forth. So it's a good match. These changes were not big changes in the model, but they did improve it slightly, okay?
What's
Okay.
shown on this, which is marked here as M14?
Okay, so first thing I said is, well, let's put an aquifer on the Grayburg. Let's seal lots of San Andreas and see what happens. And this is the latest model that's got these couple additional wells put in there as well for saltwater disposal. And you can see we got an aquifer going out basically 33 miles in the San Andreas, in the Grayburg in this case.
And what about this slide? And I want to note, it's my understanding there may be a just discrepancy in the exhibit numbers with what was filed. So this is M15 on this presentation, but I believe it's M16 in your filed exhibits, because I think our cover page was marked as an exhibit in the filing. So just wanted to make sure that's clear. So this is M14? Okay.
Or whatever. Okay.
In the filed exhibits, but it's the same document.
Okay, so all I tried to do here is let's put an aquifer on the Grayburg and see what happens and see if it's feasible. If you look at these curves, hey, we're fitting the oil, we're fitting the gas, we're fitting the water, everything's good, right? So at least on a field-wide basis, it looks okay. This aquifer, once again, goes up about 33 miles. This aquifer is actually much smaller than the aquifer I needed for the St. Andrews, because now the aquifer, you've got, I don't know, many wells on the downstep side of the Grayburg. And so you've got all these wells that are soaking in water instead of just these few little leaks, or these 100 or so leaks that we have. So as a result, we have a much smaller aquifer to match the water production, because we're just trying to fit the production. This isn't really, at this point, a history match. It's just a what if.
And what's shown on this slide, which is marked here as M16, but I believe in your filed rebuttal, it's M15.
Okay. So what you see here on the left and the bottom is I've got a number of wells on the left-hand side in yellow. And all those wells are in yellow. I call that a group. And so I add up the production for the group, and I compare that to historical water production on a field-wide basis. And in this plot on the left side on the bottom, you can see now, because we've got water not just hitting these 100 or so wells where we had these leaks that are small to large, depending on which well we selected. We've got all these wells on the west side of the reservoir where the water's hitting due to edge water drive, okay? As a result, we're making far more water. So even though we're matching the field production, we're making far more water. And of course, if we just look at San Andreas by itself, what happens in this, even though it's a huge aquifer, it still builds up pressure to 22, 21 PSI and 11, 8, 24, because you're still injecting that water. It takes time to move out. And from a physics standpoint, it just hadn't had enough time to move out before it builds up pressure. So you have those two problems.
And what's shown on M17, which is M16 in your filed rebuttal?
Okay, so this is showing another match where we said, well, let's have the Grayburg and the San Andreas, which create what I call a combined aquifer. So we got water coming from the bottom, water coming from the Grayburg. Is there some combination there that would make sense? And once again, it's the newest model. And I said the aquifer the same distance in both models, adjusted that distance until we came up with the history match.
And what's shown on M18, which is M17 in your filed?
Well, this shows the Grayburg aquifer in blue here. And the gray area would have been the extent of the San Andreas aquifer. You can see it's a much smaller aquifer, but once again, the aquifer is going out in both the Grayburg and the San Andreas the same distance.
And what's shown on M19 here, which is M18 in your filed rebuttal?
Okay, so once again, we've got a good fit of the production on a field-wide basis. Everything looks reasonable, but I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
And what about M20, which is M19 in your filed rebuttal?
It's got the same problem, right? We've got Edgewater Drive hitting all these wells on the deeper part of the Grayburg on the west side. We're never going to get a fit, and so it's just not going to work. So.
Okay. And Dr. Buckwalter, can you please summarize your conclusions?
Okay. So we have 87 years of historical production pressures, as I've said earlier. If you have a model with this much data, you can establish the relationship between the average pressure, the average pressure. You can use all these pressures to establish the volume of initial volumes of oil, water, gas we have in these reservoirs. You can also come up with good estimation of what this leak is. And I think these forecasts are, quite reasonable with the data we've got. The original oil in place is about 900 million barrels in both reservoirs, the Penrose Grayburg and then the San Andreas Roz. I didn't mention that, but the Roz is in here as well. It sits right below the Grayburg. It's in the top. We have 3 equal layers in the San Andreas. It's about, I think I got 500, maybe it's 500 millidarcies permeability in there as well. So as far as future forecasts, it almost doesn't matter whether they drill those saltwater disposal wells or not. Either way, it's very quickly within the next few years, we're going to have a leak of about 50,000 barrels a day. And unfortunately for them, their saltwater disposal rate is going to tank. And then we did some alternative matches that, just didn't work, putting an aquifer into the Grayburg. And the one thing I'm going to leave with you to kind of keep in mind is that, per Larry Lake's testimony, I guess that was a Freudian slip when I said he was working for us. But they say that he said in his testimony that the aquifer is increasing 4 to 10 psi per million barrels injected, and we're confirming the 4 in our model after the fact. And let me just leave you with a couple comments and just my impression of how you should take all these slides and just think of what we've done. I mean, as I said earlier, what the simulator does is take all the pieces together and look at it as a puzzle. And, a lot of times I think when you look at all the pieces, they're all important. I mean, I'm not denying that. You need to put all these pieces in as best you can to get the best answer possible. But I would say if you're looking at this, if you're looking at all the little pieces, it's like we're trying to look at the Superdome. And it's the lights are out and you turn on a flashlight and you look in one place, you see a seat, another place, you see the field. The nice thing about the simulator is it looks at the model from 50,000, big picture, 50,000 feet. And then you can see how all those little pieces may impact what's really going on in this reservoir. And you look at the pieces, for example, there's got to be water coming up from the bottom. It's got to be a substantial amount of water. And there's no way you can put it in the Grayburg aquifer unless you can extend it down thousands of feet. And the model is not perfect. I mean, I could work on this model for the next 2 years, but is it good enough to match the initial volumes in the reservoir and to match the production changes with time and the pressures? And it does a really good job. So I think for the purposes of determining this leak between the San Andreas and the Grayburg, I think it's a really good model. And for doing forecasts, at least on a field-wide basis. If you ask me, do you have a perfect match on this well or that? I don't. It's pretty good, at least in groups of wells and so forth, but it's not perfect. And it wasn't designed for doing that. So that's about all I got to say.
Dr. Buckwalter, is the takeaway from this based on your model that fluid is migrating from the San Andreas into the Grayburg?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is. I mean, I've seen in the testimony, there's some wells that were completed down into the San Andreas, and they're probably making some water, okay? I don't deny that. But I would say you can identify the 50 wells that have the highest water ratio in 1986 and see how many of those wells were actually completed down into San Andreas. And if it turns out that those are every well, the top 50 that are making high water ratios, if those are all completed in the San Andreas, then, Goodnight's got a good case. If not, then that water's coming up through a fracture network.
And Dr. Buckwalter, is it your opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific probability based on your modeling the water is migrating from the San Andreas into the Grayburg?
I don't see how it could not be, to be honest.
And Dr. Buckwalter, a large part of the discussion in this hearing has focused on detailed information regarding the top picks of the formation and interpretations in logs and petrophysical data. Would these different interpretations change your match model and forecast results?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to change it too much. I mean, you can change the picks here and there. It's got to change a lot. You got to put a large aquifer on the bottom of the Grayburg somehow. So unless you can put an aquifer going down, 1,000 feet and then put the San Andreas on top of it, you might have an argument, but I don't see how you could otherwise.
And my last question, Dr. Buckwalter, as you've explained, you've integrated all the parts of the puzzle into your model. And has Goodnight prepared any model to support their argument that this water influx is not occurring?
It's a really good question. I wish I could answer it. I don't know why they haven't. I can't explain why they wouldn't.
Okay.
Because, if you don't have a lot of things are interpretation. What I do is I just take the data and you give me ranges and I get the fit. You give me bad data, I'm gonna give you a bad answer, right? But there's a lot more details we could put in this model. I concede that. But for the answer it was designed for what it was designed to answer, I think it's very adequate. So
thank you. Those are all of my questions.
All right, let's take our mid-morning break and come back at 10 minutes.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I cannot agree to proceed with a cross until I have a chance to review the additional slides that I didn't see. And we just went through more than an hour of a summation of testimony, especially his rebuttal was 6 pages. That was it. And there was a lot of stuff here. He said, point blank that we skipped through 1 or 2 slides. He said those slides were just to show what I just said. Okay. I was taking notes furiously to understand what he was saying. I need a little bit of time to confer with my experts to understand what he said today, how it relates to what was in his testimony, what we understood was in his testimony previously, how it relates to what was in his deposition. I cannot agree to go forward without having the opportunity to see those slides and just to confer with my experts to understand how I need to adjust my cross-examination. I cannot agree to it.
Okay, how much time do you need?
I would like, I mean, so we're at 20 minutes till 11. I mean, frankly, I need to, I mean, I just need to sit down in a conference room with these guys and figure it out. So I would like, if it's, I mean, I would request that we come back at 1 o'clock and then allow me to proceed with the cross-examination of Dr. Buckwalter.
I think that's fair.
May I raise one issue? And it's just that Dr. Buckwalter didn't testify about the slides that we didn't show. So I guess I'm sharing them and then they'll be cross on them,
No.
even though he didn't testify about them.
Understood, Dana, if you would exclude the slides that you didn't show, 100% agree. Okay, the slides that you didn't show, you can take those out, but I would like to see the slides that everything that you did show, except for the ones that, you know, look like there were 4 or so towards the end that you didn't show. But I would like to have otherwise the complete slideshow so that I can have an opportunity to evaluate what was presented, the hour plus that he gave as a summary, that I can't discern what was in his written testimony or not. And I need to understand, I just need a little bit of time.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I actually do have a question, Mr. Rankin. You said you wanted to see the whole slideshow, and I understand your thought process behind it. But just so we understand, at least my question, how is the whole slideshow going to help you with what was presented to the commission, just so I can understand?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd like to do is I'd like to drive that slideshow, and I'd like to walk through part of my cross to investigate with Dr. Buckwalter what he said with respect to the slides. A lot of those were already, many of them are already in his. If she just wanted to send me the slides that were not in the slideshow, I mean that were not exhibits that were in the slide, that's fine. But she'd have to edit it. I'm just suggesting that she send what was presented, excluding the ones that we skipped over after I raised my objection. That way I could just sequentially walk through on a cross basis, like what he just presented to the commission.
And it's not that I'm not,
Yeah.
I don't think you should have it. I'm just asking, if we didn't hear those slides, how does that help the case? Does that make
No,
sense?
I'm sorry. I don't want it. I do not want the slides that he didn't talk to. I don't want those slides.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah.
I apologize, Mr. Examiner, it's your call.
No apologies necessary. I would have gone further and said he gets all the slides, just so that, I mean, it's not
Mr.
fair to
Harwood?
share those exhibits.
Mr. Harwood, if you could also bring the microphone just a little further down, everybody may not have heard you,
Sure.
but
But
I
I'm not
leave
gonna
that
go
call
there.
to you.
I guess I don't know. I guess I can't, not having seen them, to your point, Mr. Harwood, I don't know what he spoke to that may have been in the slides. So I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't prejudice myself, but if it's something that he spoke to that wasn't presented, then I would like to see that slide. How about that?
I'm happy to send all of the slides.
Yeah, I don't want to open a door, but, there were several times when the witness said, I wish I could present this or say this or show this. In the interest of fairness to your opponent, I'm thinking maybe he should see all of those slides. And if he wants to open that door with slides that haven't been presented, well, there you go. But
I will send them right now.
Dan and Ms. Hardy, maybe if you could just let me know which ones were presented and which ones weren't, that would be helpful as well. I appreciate that.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think I can do that.
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, if I'm hearing it correctly, we're just going to go to break until 1 o'clock, correct?
I don't see any other alternative.
Perfect. Thank you all. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
at 1.